Central Asian king of Timurid dynasty Babur was the founder of the Mughal Empire in the Indian subcontinent. The power struggle in the early years of his life gave him the essential experience of warfare that would later prove to be useful during his campaigns in the Indian subcontinent. Babur started off his Indian campaign with offensives against the Delhi-based Lodi Empire that culminated in the Battle of Panipat in 1526. A decisive Mughal victory at Panipat marked the beginning of the Mughal Empire in the subcontinent. Babur, of course, had to deal with various other Indian powers to establish the Mughal supremacy. The Mughals scored a brilliant victory over the powerful Rajput Confederacy in 1527. The Mughal rule was consolidated in 1529 when Babur defeated the Eastern Indian powers. This victory would greatly expand the domains of the Mughal Indian Empire, which, however, would be subjected to uncertainty following the untimely demise of Babur in the December of 1530. Humayun Nama was the biography of Mughal Emperor Humayun. Akbarnama was the biography of his successor, Emperor Akbar. Those two biographies have been primarily used for the preparation of this video documentary. Babur's absence created a huge political vacuum and instilled confusion among the Mughal nobility. It was a common practice for Central Asian kings to divide their empire among their sons. Timur himself divided his vast kingdom among his sons. That led to a war of succession among his beneficiaries, which lasted for 5 long years. Matters related to succession in Central Asia were mostly subjected to complications in the medieval times. Babur had 4 sons. Humayun, the eldest, was 22 years old, while the rest were teenagers. This gave Humayun a natural advantage, as the majority of Mughal nobles, if not all, preferred Humayun to mount the throne. So Humayun ascended the throne and was proclaimed the emperor. Kamran Mirza, the second son of Babur, was 19 years old. He had been the governor of Babur's possessions in Afghanistan while the emperor was away for his Indian campaigns. He had some administrative experience and was given the Afghanistan region, including the key cities of Kabul and Kandahar. After Babur's demise, however, it is unclear whether Kamran was to be the independent ruler of Afghanistan. It is more likely that he was to act in coordination with Humayun and the Delhi government. Humayun's other brothers, Askari and Hindal, were too young. It was decided that they would be given high positions in Humayun's government when they would come of age. Humayun had a problem. Not every member of the Mughal nobility saw him as the rightful heir to the throne. Although this problem would not show up immediately, it would have an effect in the years to come. Humayun had earlier taken part in Babur's military campaigns in the Indian subcontinent. He had shown determination and acted under the guidance of experienced generals. However, his capacity as a commander and his administrative abilities as an independent ruler were yet to be established. Humayun in the Persian language means fortunate, which is ironical since he had to endure long spells of misfortune in his life. Mughals were still seen as foreigners by most of the other Indian powers, who were seeking territorial gains at the expense of the Mughals. The most prominent of them were the Sultanate of Gujarat and the region of Bihar, located to Humayun's south and east respectively. While Gujarat was keen on northwards expansion, Bihar was occupied by Afghans and would go on to develop as a major rallying center against the Mughals. Humayun found it difficult to consolidate the Mughal Indian Empire. Babur's unrelenting, expensive military campaigns in the subcontinent had put pressure on the economic resources of the empire. This problem, however, was less severely felt during Babur's reign due to the presence of strong leadership on the Mughal imperial throne. After Humayun's accession, the Mughal governors of various provinces and forts were less submissive to the emperor, and they treated their jagirs, or the regions allotted to them, as their own mini kingdoms. The biggest threat to the Mughal Empire at this point was the growing power of the Gujarat Sultanate. To secure the southern flank of his empire, Humayun undertook a campaign in central India in early 1531. As a part of that campaign, Humayun laid siege to the strategic and formidable fort of Kalinjar that lies in the region of Bundelkhand. The ruler of Kalinjar, Prataprudra, was no pushover, and Humayun was denied a quick breakthrough. Meanwhile, news reached Humayun that the Afghans of Bihar had captured Jaunpur from the Mughals. The Mughals were thus forced to lift the siege and march to the east to deal with the Afghans. In the middle of 1531, Humayun was able to subdue the Afghans and recapture Jaunpur. However, an alarming news reached him that forced him to march back to Agra. Humayun's brother Kamran Mirza had moved from Kabul to Lahore with his troops, on the pretext of congratulating the emperor on his accession. There he took possession of Punjab from the Mughal officers. Kamran wrote friendly letters to Humayun, requesting Punjab for himself. Humayun complied as he needed Kamran's cooperation against the external powers. So, by an imperial firman or imperial order, Kamran was given the province of Punjab. Historians regard this decision as an imprudent one, as it denied Humayun of the crucial link with Central Asia, in addition to the prosperous Indus region. The young king of the Sultanate of Gujarat, known by the name of Bahadur Shah, held expansionist ambitions. His growing power was turning into a major threat for the Mughals in the subcontinent. Bahadur Shah had annexed Malwa in 1510 1731. He had enlisted the service of talented Turkish artillery officers who previously served the Ottoman Empire. This helped the Gujarat Sultanate bolster up its military strength as they looked to get the better of other Indian powers. Bahadur Shah was of Muzaffarid dynasty that had ruled Gujarat since 1391. The kingdom enjoyed a natural advantage based on its strategic location. It controlled some of the oceanic trade routes from the Middle East to the Indian subcontinent. It also held control of the land routes from North India to some of the ports in the Arabian Sea that were frequented by merchants and traders. This helped to generate massive revenue that could then be used to maintain a strong army and a formidable navy. Bahadur Shah had annexed Malwa in 1531. Malwa is a region in central India. He had invaded Chittor after 4 years and forced it into submission. The Sultanate of Gujarat crossed the line when it began providing refuge to prominent Afghan leaders and other political enemies of the Mughals. It was suspected that Bahadur Shah was looking to attack North India and that he was even eyeing the throne of Delhi. The Mughals delivered him an ultimatum and demanded that Bahadur Shah hand them over all the enemies whom he had sheltered. But Bahadur Shah was at the height of his power at this point, and he promptly refused. This would inevitably lead to a declaration of war between the Mughal Empire and the Sultanate of Gujarat. Humayun assumed the offensive in 1535 and he camped in Mandsaur. The Gujarati army, well aware of its numerical disadvantage, took up a defensive position. Humayun's generals came up with a brilliant plan. A part of the Mughal army attacked the Gujarati supply lines, and they managed to cut it off. Next morning, the Gujarati troops discovered that they had fallen short of food and other provisions. Hungry soldiers left the camp and Gujarati troops were scattered. Humayun pretended to launch an attack and the Gujarati army melted away in panic. The Mughals had achieved victory without losing a single soldier. They captured the enemy's camp and eventually took control of Gujarat and Malwa in their entirety. Gujarat King Bahadur Shah fled and he was given shelter at the island of Diu by the Portuguese, who by this point had established themselves in the subcontinent and were looking to expand their influence. Following their triumphant takeover of Gujarat, the Mughals decided to set up their own government. Humayun's 20-year-old brother Askari Mirza was appointed the governor of Gujarat. Several Mughal officers took up their positions in the new Gujarati government. Humayun then returned to Mandu in central India in the middle of 1535 to be able to keep a watch on both Gujarat and northern India. The absence of Humayun in Gujarat had a massive consequence. Dispute broke out between Governor Askari and his Mughal officers. The local Gujarati population saw this as a perfect opportunity. Former Sultan Bahadur Shah's officers and generals managed to reorganize themselves. They launched a surprise attack on the Mughal troops in Gujarat that was already weakened by internal disputes. The Mughal troops were unable to deal with that vicious assault. The Mughal army was comprehensively routed. Askari fled towards the north with his followers, pursued by the Gujarati army. The escaping Askari Mirza nearly reached Agra in early 1537. News of this development reached Humayun, and he left Mandu for Agra to safeguard his throne. Following the departure of Humayun, Gujarat and Malwa went out of the hands of the Mughals, never again to be conquered by Humayun. The Gujarat nobles invited their fugitive king and reinstalled Sultan Bahadur Shah on the throne in late 1536. the Gujarat Sultanate was restored to its former glory. Their prosperity would be short-lived, however. The Gujarat Sultanate and the Portuguese competed for influence in the coastal regions of the Arabian Sea. Bahadur Shah's attempt to capture the Portuguese governor by deceit in early 1537 led to a naval battle at the island of Diu that ended fatally for the Sultan. The death of Sultan Bahadur Shah put the kingdom of Gujarat into a highly uncertain state. Bahadur Shah was succeeded by Miran Muhammad Shah, who failed to bring stability to his kingdom. The Sultanate of Gujarat would no longer continue to threaten the Mughal Empire in the Indian subcontinent. Meanwhile, the Afghans in the eastern part of the Indian subcontinent had reorganized themselves under the leadership of an impressive personality, yet to be known as Sher Shah Suri. At this point, he was called Sher Khan and was the virtual ruler of South Bihar. Sher Khan held control of the strong fort of Chunar that acted as his base due to its strategic location. By 1537, he had gathered the support of most Afghan nobles, who were eager to challenge the Mughal supremacy in the Indian subcontinent. Sher Khan had launched repeated offensives with remarkable success against the neighboring kingdom, the Sultanate of Bengal. Bengal was growing weaker with time due to the absence of a strong ruler on the throne. The Afghans, under the leadership of Sher Khan, were seeking gains at the Bengali expense and decided to attack Bengal yet again in 1537. This time, the Sultan of Bengal begged help from the Mughal Emperor Humayun. Humayun agreed, and the massive Mughal army marched towards the east. The emperor himself assumed the command of the Mughal troops. On the way to Bengal, the Mughal troops stopped at Chunar. Humayun decided to capture the fort of Chunar that was a geographic gateway to the province of Bihar. Sher Khan, by this point, had left an Afghan garrison at Chunar to defend the fort, and he had moved his main army to Bengal. Humayun's siege of the Chunar fort was met with determined Afghan resistance, and it took the Mughals around half a year to take the fort. Sher Khan, meanwhile, had defeated the Bengali army, and he had taken possession of the Bengali capital of Gaur in 1538. The Afghans seized the royal treasury at Gaur and quickly moved it to the fort of Rohtas, which is located in Bihar. Humayun realized that he had wasted precious time at the siege of Chunar. He moved to Benares to try his hand at making some kind of a peace agreement with Sher Khan. Peace negotiations between the Mughals and the Afghans followed, although at a very slow pace. After a few months, it looked likely that peace would be arranged. Sher Khan would be allowed to become the governor of Bengal under the overlordship of the Mughals. The Afghans would have to pay 1 million rupees annually as a tribute to the Mughal government. Sher Khan would also have to give up Bihar to the Mughals. With the terms of peace being discussed, it only remained for both parties to sign and finalize the agreement. At this point, the Bengali generals requested Humayun to attack Bengal and save their sultan. Though initially reluctant, Humayun was eventually convinced. He broke off negotiations with Sher Khan and led the Mughal troops into Bengal in the middle of 1538. Sher Khan was aware of the act of breach of peace agreement on the part of the Mughals. He decided to act with prudence. The Afghan army was moved to Bihar from Bengal, and Humayun faced no resistance. The Mughal troops occupied Bengal in late 1538. It was at this point that Sher Khan played his masterstroke. The Afghan army raided the Mughal posts to the north of Bihar. The Afghans rapidly captured Kara, Benares, Sambhal, Jaunpur, and gained control of the eastern part of the province that is now called Uttar Pradesh. Afghan occupation of these territories virtually blocked Humayun's way back to Delhi or Agra. Meanwhile, another startling piece of news came from Agra. Babur's son and Humayun's brother, Hindal Mirza, had proclaimed himself the Mughal emperor at Agra, and he had seized the imperial treasury. Bewildered by those two pieces of shocking developments, Humayun was left with no choice but to quickly return to North India to take control of his empire. That was now in jeopardy. The Mughal army started their march towards the west in early 1539. Humayun had left behind a small Mughal garrison in Bengal. The main Mughal army crossed the Ganges and encamped at Chausa, which is located near Patna. Here they stood facing the Afghan army for 3 months. Sher Khan prudently delayed the battle and waited for monsoon to arrive. As the Afghans held the higher ground, it would give him an advantage that would compensate for his numerical weakness. Sher Khan also opened peace talks with the Mughals. That led Humayun into believing that negotiations were on the way. The Mughal troops became relaxed in the hope of a peace agreement, and their camps were no longer on high alert. Meanwhile, some local problems had developed in Bihar that would need attention from Sher Khan. On the 25th of June, Sher Khan marched south with most of the Afghan troops, and it was given out that he was marching to Bihar to address some kind of a local problem. Humayun came to know of that from his spies, and the Mughal troops were relieved in the hope that a war could be avoided. However, the next day, Sher Khan's Afghan troops came back to Chausa and found that the Mughals were relaxed. So Sher Khan ordered an attack at daybreak. The Mughals hardly expected a battle on that day. They rubbed their sleepy eyes and saw the Afghan soldiers charging at them. The Mughal troops were routed by the sudden attack. Many of them perished in their own camps. In a desperate bid to save themselves from the Afghan swords, many of the Mughal soldiers jumped into the river. But the Ganges is not easy to swim in the season of monsoon. As many as 9,000 Mughal soldiers were drowned in the river, and the horse of Emperor Humayun suffered a similar fate. Humayun was rescued by a water carrier named Nizam, who helped him swim across the river. Humayun reached Agra in late 1539 with his surviving Mughal troops. History has it that in order to gratify the wish of his savior, Humayun allowed the water carrier Nizam to sit on the royal throne of Agra for one day. On that day, he was allowed to reward his own friends and relatives with royal gifts, with the consent of Humayun. The Afghan army at Chausa had gained control of the enemy's camp that contained massive wealth. Nearly all the Mughal field cannons and weapons fell into the hands of Sher Khan. That enormously elevated his status and reputation. He had gained the most complete victory that he could possibly achieve. After this victory, Sher Khan declared himself an emperor and ascended the throne with the regnal name of Sher Shah Suri. His troops captured Bengal, and the Afghans marched towards Agra to challenge Humayun. All three brothers of Humayun, Kamran, Askari, and Hindal Mirza, were present at Agra. Humayun displayed generosity by granting pardon to Hindal, despite his act of treason. Kamran suggested a quick attack on the approaching Afghan troops. Humayun refused. So Kamran withdrew to Lahore with his own troops. Humayun went out with his brothers Hindal and Askari to fight the approaching Afghans. The two armies met at Kannauj, around 200 kilometers east of Agra. Again, Humayun was given a crushing defeat by Sher Shah Suri. In the middle of May 1540, and the Mughal troops had to escape to Lahore. Humayun was again accompanied by his brothers, this time at Lahore, with the troops of Sher Shah Suri drawing closer with each passing day. The Mughal Empire is in trouble. Will it be able to take power back from the Afghans and their capable leader Sher Shah Suri? You can find out by watching the next episode of the documentary series. Thank you for watching.